Good evening, y'all. My name is Mackenzie New Walker, and I work as the director of the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum, a grassroots institution that educates and preserves a people's history of the coal wars. We're located in historic Maitland, and we've been around for 9 years now. The museum's work entails a diverse public programming, including this Mine Wars Forum. Our small team works daily to educate and preserve the stories of coal miners and their families' efforts to unionize the southern coal fields of West Virginia. We preserve and curate artifacts and exhibits, both digitally and in person. We provide lesson plans and a growing list of resources for teachers to get this history into their classrooms. And most recently, we've been building monuments in West Virginia with our Courage in the Hollers project. This evening, you're tuning into the final episode of Mine Wars Forum Season 4. Tonight, our discussion will lean into the legacy of the 2018 educator strike that shook the Mountain State 5 years ago. And as we mark this anniversary, I also want to recognize an important date in Mine Wars history. 110 years ago today, on the night of February 7th, 1913, mine guards, railway police, and sheriff's deputies led by Paint Creek operator Quinn Morton and Kanawha Sheriff Boner Hill rode through the Holly Grove tent colony on their way to Mucklow, which was the mine guards' headquarters, and Union miners had shot up earlier that day. Gunfire erupted between the strikers and the men on the train, and they let off a series of shots into the tent camp, killing one miner, Francesco, also known as Sesko Estep, who was attempting to escort his family to safety. The incident, wrote the poet Ralph Chaplin, said that this had transformed the Paint Creek Cabin Creek strike from a labor conflict into a small-scale civil war. If you'll join me, I would like to take a few moments to remember the life and legacy of Sesko Estep. Thank you. This year's Mine Wars Forum has been made possible in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council. Any views, findings, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the Council. Tonight's guests include educator Nicole McCormick, activist Rick Wilson, and former state folklorist, author, and Mine Wars Museum board member Emily Hilliard. Welcome, y'all. I want to say thanks to each of you for being here, and we can go ahead and dig right in. I wanted to give each of you a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, and I'd love to hear who are you, where are you calling in from, and where were you during the 2018 educator strike? And Rick, I'd love to start with you.
Okay, well, I'm calling in from a little place south of Milton, West Virginia. I work for the American Friends Service Committee, which is a social justice group actually started by the Quakers in 1917. They've been in West Virginia off and on for 100 years, doing a lot of economic justice work. I worked for them for 34 years, been involved in several different coal strikes, a major lockout, 3 teacher strikes so far, and a bunch of fights at the legislature. And I remember facing the 2018 legislative session with dread, and then suddenly this beautiful uprising occurred, and we were all over it. I have to disclose that my grandmother, mother, ex, and current spouse were public school teachers, so it's kind of personal for me. And I still remember when the victory came and everybody left. We were like, no, don't leave us. Please stay here forever. But anyway, that's a brief one for me.
Thank you, Rick. Nicole.
So I'm Nicole McCormick, and I am calling in from beautiful Roncevert, West Virginia, which nobody can seem to spell correctly, and that's in Greenbrier County. I am originally from Mercer County, and that's where I spent most of my time during the strike. I was a vice president during the 2018 strike, and somewhat of a state leader, I guess. And then in the 2019 strike, I was president on my own right for the Mercer County Education Association, which is one of the largest locals in the entire state. And, it's been transformative. on so many levels. And I've really found my people. And that is so wonderful in a state that can somewhat be physically isolating, to be able to find people that see you and appreciate you for exactly who you are, and you get to give that same love and respect back. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to be on this with such wonderful folks.
Thanks, Nicole. Emily?
Hello, I'm Emily Hilliard. I am a folklorist calling in from Berea, Kentucky tonight. And during the 2018 teacher strike, I was working as the state folklorist. And I think I was at the Capitol every day but 2. I was actually on vacation when the strike started. And I was like watching videos in the hotel, like, I got to get back to West Virginia. So I did documentation at the Capitol of photos, Vox Pop interviews, recordings of speeches, really documenting the expressive culture of the teacher strike. And you can find most of those materials in the West Virginia Folklife digital archive that is at WV Libraries.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. We'll be sure to drop a link in the comments so that folks can check that stuff out. Nicole, so we might have some folks who are watching or listening that might be unfamiliar with the strike. Could you talk about what was at stake? What was the fight?
Yeah, so I'm a native West Virginian, and other than skipping across the border to Virginia for a little tiny bit, I have been here. And my public school teachers, as someone who grew up fairly poor, and with a fairly uneducated family, or lesser educated, my public school teachers were my saviors in a lot of ways. They were the people that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so I didn't go into teaching thinking, this is it, this is what I'm going to do. I sang pretty. And it was what made me happy. And so I went to Concord University and I became a music teacher with the thought that I wanted to give that same joy and hope to kids that may be a reflection of what I was when I was a young child. So wages weren't great. I started teaching in 2009, and they're even worse if you're considered a service personnel, which it's always important whenever we talk about this to remember that they were absolutely important to the success of this strike. And so that's the reason whenever you hear us, a lot of times we'll say educator strike, because they are part of the education of children of West Virginia. And so I taught, and I kind of survived, which is what you do your first couple of years. You're kind of thrown to the wolves. And then I had a couple of kids, and I was asked to get involved in my local. And I didn't just become involved, I became heavily involved. I found my passion in that. But I will say that my view of what a union can and should be is different now because of our struggle. So what was at stake was our health care. All state employees have the same health care in West Virginia, which is PEIA, the Public Employees Insurance Agency. And so whether that you are a bus driver or a cook or a state trooper, you all have the same access, unless that your spouse has a different type of health care. Well, they decided, the legislature, because the legislature is very heavy-handed in West Virginia when it comes to basically everything, but especially education, public education, they decided they were going to collapse these tiers. And so the people on the bottom were going to pay more. The people on the top were going to pay less, and everybody in the middle was kind of in the middle, because how much you paid for your premium was based upon that. So they wanted to increase copays. They wanted to even take into account if you had a teenage kid that worked at the gas station on the weekend, they wanted to take their income and to be part of it as well. And then to add to that, disgusting Sunday of things was the fact that we essentially were making less because our pay raises did not keep up with inflation. So, for example, I know that we are a very impoverished state, but I had to go into a lot of debt to be able to get a bachelor's and a master's degree. I taught for 13 years. And with that bachelor's and master's degree, the most I ever made was $48,000. You say that to people that have very strong labor laws, and they about choke. That's less than their beginning teachers make. And at that point in time, I think it's very important for me to mention this. A starting head cook in Raleigh County, which is a bordering county to Mercer, the woman who was in charge of the kitchen, because she was a woman, she made $20,000. How was a single mother supposed to be the person in charge of the entire kitchen and make 20 grand? Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then you put those healthcare costs. They were also trying to privatize our school system, which they eventually succeeded in. But so it was just a lot of things that kind of came to a boiling point. And thankfully, we had people that knew what organizing really was and were a force behind that. And we had the internet, the magic of the internet, to be able to communicate with each other, because it is very physically isolating sometimes in West Virginia. And so we were able to look at what other communities, other counties were doing and go, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And so things that we didn't even know what to call, walk-ins, pickets, we had no idea. I was not even in kindergarten whenever the 1990 strike happened. I started the fall afterwards. So it was not in my mind at all that was a possibility of something we could do. It just felt like it was something we had to do, and we did it.
Yeah. Thank you, Nicole. I definitely want to get to that dilemma of social media a little bit later. I want to turn to Rick, because Rick, you were around during the 1990 strike and involved. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the connections that we can draw between what was happening in 2018 versus what was going on in 1990, and what were the similarities, what are the differences?
So some of it, the PEIA thing, a lot of medical providers weren't even wanting to accept PEIA at the time. Morale was really horrible. Teacher pay was really low. But I think the thing is, like, there comes a point where people just feel insulted. Like, there's a point where, okay, I put up with all kinds of crap up to now, but not anymore. And so one similarity was it grew up mostly from Southern West Virginia. Big surprise, a spontaneous thing. It's not, you can't manufacture social movements like this. I wish to God you could. Sometimes they just flare up, and the 90 thing was a beautiful example. But it was really different then. West Virginia was such a strong union state. The Pittston coal strike, which lasted from April 89 to February 90, I believe, had just ended. And that was this massive, again, outpouring of solidarity. People from all over the world came there. It was probably the last time all the good guys were on the same side. They got really good at dividing us since then. It was the last wildcat strike in Southern West Virginia that happened in the wake of it. So the climate was very different then. And then as the strike ended, I have to confess, a lot of us who were involved in it were kind of addicted, and there's this huge letdown when the fight ends, so I'll always be grateful to the teachers for starting that one, because I was really getting the shakes at that point. But some things that were different, though, really different, was the superintendents did not close schools in 1990. The schools were open, so some teachers crossed the picket lines. Some school support people did. Some parents sent their kids to school. It was a lot edgier in a sense, potentially more divisive, especially after it. It was a historic victory, but thank God the superintendents closed the schools. I think that was a really key in 2018, and it happened pretty much in 2019 with one notable exception. But I want to tell one funny story, and then I'll shut up. My mother had just retired from teaching in Cabell County schools, and Cabell County didn't go out, and she was mad about that. People were calling it Scabell County, and she said to me, "Why don't you get some of your coal miner friends to come up here and shut down Cabell County schools?" And I thought, I love this woman. That's the best idea ever. So I picked up the phone and called Bethel Perkey and Elaine Perkey, Emily, as you know, and they were going to do it, and then the day they were going to come up here was the day they settled it and went back to work, which is my biggest complaint with the labor movement. I started having fun and y'all settled. So I think we need to talk about that at some point. But anyway, I'll stop there.
That's the first time I've heard of Scabell County. Emily, I want to turn to you now and go back to this idea of social media and strikes and resistance. Can you talk about the roles that social media played during the 2018 strike?
Yeah, I think probably most instrumental, and Nicole can speak to this, was really that so much organizing was done online. And there was a secret Facebook group that teachers were talking to each other. And like Nicole said, from across the state, social media really allowed for teachers to form this network across the state and figure out what was going on in other counties. And I think there were like tens of thousands of teachers in that group by the time it was at its peak. And I know that was also instrumental when the bargain was made by leadership and the rank and file rejected it. And I was at the Capitol. I know all the media, like I saw on NBC News reporting the strike is over, and I just knew it was not over. I was getting mad at the mainstream media because it was just so clear the reaction from the rank and file on the Capitol steps. And then I know on Facebook was that they were not accepting that deal. But then also in really inspiring public support, I think social media was crucial, and teachers really had a lot of fun with it, like they did with their protest signs too. So there were these memes that, ridiculed certain politicians by saying, that they didn't like pepperoni rolls, or they were fans of Pitt. These West Virginia values, they were really saying that, these politicians kind of betray these values. And I kind of think of that, thinking historically as a form of digital rough music. So rough music is a technique that's, dates back to at least the 14th century. And you've probably seen it depicted in movies or like Game of Thrones when the queen is parading through the street naked, being shamed. That's a form of rough music where anyone whose values, usually a leader, a person in power, their kind of actions betray the values of a community, they get ridiculed. And often that would happen in like loud, noise and banging of pots and processions through the street. But I kind of think of these memes as doing that in digital spaces. I think they also edited a certain politician's Wikipedia page to also, say that he hated pepperoni rolls and hot dogs. Or ordered ketchup on his Yan's hot dogs. So I was collecting a lot of these memes, and they were just really humorous and creative. And I think that was also a way that teachers kept their courage up and made jokes and had fun with it as well.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost Kenzie.
Oh no. I will speak to what you were talking about. So I was one of the moderators. There was a team of us that moderated on that page. And I lived with my phone in my hand during the strike because we wanted to make sure that the people who were in the group should be in the group. And so we were trying to figure out who was a public employee and who wasn't. And we wanted to make sure that the information was correct. And so there was a team of us. And so it went from 30 people in August of 2017 to a couple thousand, in late fall, early winter, to 24,000 people. And so all of these people, we tried to do our best to vet them. We saw, did they have the frame? Can I see where they work at? Because, we wanted it to be public employees. We didn't want it to be just teachers, just education employees. We wanted it to be everyone because everyone had PEIA. And so, yeah, talking about rough music, and she's talking about Mitch Carmichael. I will say his name. And so I think that, which his name just lended itself beautifully to be put in all these songs, move Mitch, get out the way. Mitch better have my money. Resting Mitch face. You're a mean one, Mr. Mitch. I mean, there was Mean Girls with his face on there. And then, Ojeda was kind of the hero at the time. And so I remember some of the funny ones, comparing him to Chuck Norris, he was our tough man. But I saw that memory the other day whenever Ojeda set up and said, if you don't think we're sitting on a powder keg, you're not paying attention. And so it was such an unexpected and beautiful, and like Rick said, it's like you're always trying to get it back. You're like, where's my statewide strike? Where did it go? Like it's like you want that again. You want that sense of respect and power, and and being able to put people in their place that normally don't pay attention to you. Not the parents, not our community members. We're part of our community. Schools are the heart of the communities. We're talking about legislators that we literally could cut ourselves open, and they're just like, oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Nicole, had you participated in a strike or any kind of strike action before 2018? And I know you have lots and lots of stories from your grandfather and your great uncles about what it was like for them being coal miners. Could you talk a little bit about the similarities that you were feeling and found?
Yeah. So my grandparents are from Wyoming County. My mother's maiden name is Lusk. There's a lot of Lusks and McKinneys up on Herndon Mountain in Wyoming County. And my grandpa was one of many children, and my grandmother was too. She was, her maiden name was Mitchum. And I think there was like Odals. And she was born in McComas, coal camp. But so, I spent really my maternal grandparents kind of co-raised me with my mother. And so I spent a lot of time with them, and I spent a lot of time on their farm in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming County. And my grandpa and most of his brothers worked in the mines. And I've always loved the fact that miners have nicknames. Like I've heard some great ones like High Pockets and Taters. And, like my grandpa was Taters because apparently whenever that they would cook together, he always brought the fried potatoes because his were the best. So he was Taters Jack. But like, I remember seeing recipes written on the back of pay stubs that would have nothing because all the money went to the coal camp, went to the coal company store. And it was like, it was kind of there, but it wasn't, I didn't go into this thinking, I'm going to honor my grandpa, or like, I'm going to do what he did. Or I didn't think that. What I thought was, I'm either going to fight or I'm going to have to leave. And that was it. It was this sense of survival. And so now, like looking back on it and being able to unpack it, I see so much of that. Like I see so much of like when people brought food, when people gave you a kind word, whenever that they told you they were with you, like it makes me think of all the things that we do as West Virginians in our communities. Whenever that we have potlucks and whenever that we get together, or if you have your family reunion in the graveyard, like you're still bringing in those pieces of those people that have passed on. Like, I think that that's something so beautiful about what we do as West Virginians, as Appalachians. So no, I had never participated in anything. I'm the oldest. So, birth order definitely is a thing. And I've always been very passionate, and I'm a musician, and I've always felt like that if somebody was going to speak, it was going to be me. I was going to speak for me. And I didn't have an issue with speaking up. And, we wore red for Ed, which came out of the 2012 strike in Chicago. And it's like, it was there, but it needed to be nurtured. Like it needed to have that catalyst. And so like Rick said, you get to a point where you're just like, I'm either going to fight or I'm going to leave. And and that's what it was. And I just remember thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to cry. I just remember thinking like, my grandparents are buried here. Am I going to leave that? Am I going to leave like their home because that I can't stay here? And I just felt like I knew I was going to have to fight. And so I did. And I will like never regret it. And I will never think, oh, we didn't get everything, or we didn't get enough, or we didn't get a fix to PEIA, because it changed me. It changed who I am and the way I look at things. So, and I know that I'm not the only one. I know that so many people like found their sense of purpose, and they found like their strength, and they found that connection to the people that have been before us. So I am so grateful to everybody, to the thousands and thousands of people that like said, they're right. they're doing the right thing. And I mean, and if I live another 80 years, or if I live another 2, I want my children and the children that I taught to see that we fought, and it wasn't perfect, but it was the right thing to do.
Thank you for fighting, and thank you for sharing that with us.
So if I could jump in there, I just know, like, especially like in longer struggles. I mean, this was very short and intense, and some of them go on for a long time, but like, it's really stressful at the time. But deep down, there's a part of people who knows this is the time of your life you're having right now. You're really alive. You've been an anvil all your life. Now you get to be a hammer for once, and it's that really great feeling, just that lift. And unfortunately, it doesn't last forever, but you can keep trying to build things so that when it comes again, we can take it farther.
Yeah. Rick, could you talk a little bit more about the Pittston Strike, which was one of those that did go on for a while, and what was your role, and what was the stake? How did it differ from the 2018 strike, and then how did the two converge?
So it was funny. It's one that, like, the mine, UMW worked for 14 months without a contract before Pittston, which was unheard of. And they underwent training in nonviolent direct action and things like that. And it was a strike everybody knew was coming. And it was kind of Massey was always in the background of the Pittston Strike too, because Massey withdrew from the Coal Association, and now Pittston was going to do it. And it was this big fight, mostly about like healthcare and pensions and retirement. And again, it was the same company that killed 125 people in the Buffalo Creek disaster in 1972. I had just started my job, and I felt like there's that song "Center Field" by John Fogerty. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play today. And just having a chance to go down there to the coal fields, spend times on the picket line. And like, people got shot, houses got burned down. People would have their vehicles run into by, scab coal trucks. It was really intense, but there was also this fellowship. There's actually love and friendship there, and, that people had. And so, we would try to do, set up speaking engagements, try to raise money, do press, write things for it, bring people to visit the picket lines, because it's stressful and boring. And if you feel isolated, then people are more likely to do things they'll regret that could hurt the struggle. So in any long fight, it's important to do things that keep people's morale up so that you can raise hell and have fun and feel like you're doing something. So we did like a toy drive for Christmas, and, clothing drive early on, and just a bunch of different things like that, music, things like that, to really sustain the fight as it went on. And, the psychologist Eric Erickson says a person will always try to recreate the first fight where they felt at home, and that was mine.
Yeah. I think the best music comes out of strikes. Like I know we talked about a couple already, like Move Mitch, Get Out the Way, but I love that, like, this, you don't forget stuff like that, for sure. On the subject of long struggles, I did want to talk about the Warrior Met strike that is still going on. It's coming up on 2 years, and miners in Alabama are still holding the line. And, as we talk about ways to show up, and care for one another during strikes, one of those is to donate if you have the funds. And the UMWA has a strike fund, and they also have a strike pantry fund that we are going to drop in the comments for folks. If you have the means, please consider throwing a few dollars their way. I did want to ask, this is a question for everyone. Other than donating, what are ways that people show up for each other on strikes and love each other during strikes? One of which we've already talked about is food. Are there others?
I mean, they call it accompaniment, which just means being there, bringing people there so that people don't feel isolated, creating opportunities for people to get out and tell their story, doing media events, And again, this was before social media, some of the ones I was involved in. But I just have one thought I want to mention. Like, you cannot always tell at the time whether you're winning or losing. You can think you win and really lose and vice versa. So if I can just go back to Pittston, it went out of the coal business a few years later. Massey bought it up. So it was a victory, and yet it didn't end well, but yet it did help secure pension and health care for, retirees, going on up into the future too. So, it was a great victory in 2018. The Empire struck back. It's not over yet. So we have to maintain that long view.
Some of the things that meant a lot were people giving what gifts they had. I know that sounds a little cliche, but like it would be something as simple as, my house is really close. Do you want to come over and get warm and dry off for a while when we were out there in like the rain or the snow? Or some people donated their time for childcare instead of standing on the line. Some folks literally just came by to say, hey, this is what this means to me. Even if they didn't stay very long, just having that like encouragement. One of the things that has meant a lot to me that I never expected I would get is hearing people from other states and other countries talk about how important it was to them. And most people don't get that, and so I've made a point every time I'm around a group of people that I know were involved with the strike, I talk about it. I talk about Polish teachers, saying how important it was, or folks from the UK. There's teachers are striking right now in the UK, and in Lewisham, and I'm not for sure anywhere else, but I know there specifically. But I got to have a conversation with some of those ladies this summer. And I mean, we always think that West Virginia is represented as like the armpit of the earth. We don't like see it as something positive a lot from the outside. And for them to be like, oh my God, you're from West Virginia. You're like, yes, I am. Or singing Country Roads. Oh my gosh. Talking about music. Like I have always loved Country Roads, but it means something. Like it is so magical when 300 people will sing it at 2:00 in the morning in a bar with you in Chicago. Like it's so amazing for people to be like, there's the West Virginians, lead us in it. Like, those things, that's what matters. Just somebody sharing that funny meme or standing up in a comment section and saying, no, they're right, you're wrong. All that stuff is helpful.
I think, Nicole, what you said about the strike connecting you to people all over West Virginia, but also past generations. I think that's just so beautiful. But also thinking about the way teachers are care workers themselves, and the way that the teachers were showing care for their communities, first of all, by striking, because they were really saying this is about the future of our communities and our working conditions, our students' learning conditions. And so you saw educators packing lunches to make sure that kids got fed when there wasn't school. And really, I think it's this kind of care for the future. The fact that you all went out on strike is showing this care that connects you to, whatever strike will happen in the future, or all those public school students who will grow up and remember, the strike and think about labor differently.
And I think just to say one little thing about that, about like the food and stuff, it's like, I didn't think I was saving anybody. I didn't think I was doing anything. Just in my mind, I knew how many children are food dependent on the schools. And I just remember going, okay, well, if we weren't open, if we weren't here, who could feed them? And so I just made some phone calls to like local churches and to local organizations. And they were like, oh yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you a list of one that we're willing to provide for families and their children. I kind of got my hand smacked. They were like, you haven't even went out on strike and you're planning for it. And I'm like, yeah, I am. But like, I think that's something to remember for anything, is like, there are always people out there that are willing to support you because they see what's best for the common good. So it never hurts to ask, what's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody tells you no. Like,
Totally.
And something grew out of that. A lot of food and hunger organizing grew out of the teacher strike, and because it made people think about how kids eat when they're not in school, and so legislation was passed, and a stronger one might actually pass this time, requiring school boards to come up with, to assess where kids meet their food needs when they're not in school. And it led to a bunch of organizing during COVID. And now the summer EBT is a permanent thing for kids, which is a really huge deal. So it kept spinning out. There are a lot of results to it.
For sure. I want to ask each of you, in what ways was the strike successful? And if you had a chance to do it all over again, is there anything that you would do differently? And Nicole, you already spoke to this a little bit, so I'm going to give first dibs to you.
So repeat the first part of the question. I remember the do something differently, but
yeah, in what ways was the strike successful?
I feel like it was most successful in us gaining our humanity back. Like that we had been conceding our power by begging and pleading to people that could not care any less about what we were doing. And so we were able to share those stories that we had just been sharing amongst ourselves. I will never forget. I can see her face. She's got to be a grown woman now. But I will never forget the first time I had a child who had matted hair and rotten teeth and was sleeping and always was hungry and always was dirty. And it's like, I will never forget that. And like with being in the schools, whether you're a bus driver, a cook, a secretary, an aide, a custodian, you have this very unique view of your community that a lot of people don't have. They're privileged to be able to ignore it. And so we were able to share that. We were able to talk about that publicly. And so I think it gave a lot of, like Rick said, there was like a big ripple effect of people being like, oh, maybe this isn't an isolated event just here in McDowell. Like maybe this isn't something that just happens in Berkeley. Like there was this understanding that we're talking about serious stuff. And we have more grandparents than biological parents raising children in a lot of our counties. And I mean, I have a child that was adopted through the foster care system that is not biologically my child. I mean, she's mine. She's my baby, but she's not biologically. And I mean, she's there because of the opioid crisis. Like that's how she got into foster care. That's how she's now mine. And that has permanent effects. And us as the schools, we have to deal with that. And we have to learn how to navigate it. As far as doing anything different, I don't know if I could. Like Rick said, it's like I almost felt sometimes like it was so out of my control, like I was being picked up by the crowd and moved around, and that I was just fighting. Like I was just fighting because it was the right thing to do. Like, and it's because what I felt like I had to do. I mean, we were living off of $15 a day. Like, and that was supposed to cover gas, food, and diapers for 4 children under 6. And we were both teachers, and we weren't, I mean, my husband was working extra. Like we both had went and done all this extra education, and we just couldn't make it. Like we just couldn't make ends meet. And I felt so guilty. Like, maybe I shouldn't have bought Burger King last night, or, maybe I shouldn't have had all these kids, or whatever it was, even though one of those kids I adopted. And whenever that I spoke about it publicly, there were so many people that were like, me too. I thought it was me. Like I thought I was broken. And the fact that so many of us realize that it's a systemic issue and that we're not broken, the system is, like, that's a victory. I'll call that a victory all day, every day. So I don't know if I would do anything differently, because I don't know if I could. Like it just felt like I was just kind of along for the ride sometimes and didn't really have control of the ship.
Yeah. Thank you. Rick?
I don't think it could have been done much better than it was done. I mean, really, it was one of those magical moments. And I will say, sometimes there's tension between organizations and grassroots movements, but this showed you need that spontaneity, but you also need the organizing power and sustainability. And people did manage to keep their differences off stage and present a united front, which was really critical. It did kick off a wave that went far beyond West Virginia. And the thing for me, like, I grew up in a worker state, and to see the things I've seen the last few years, passing right to work, repealing prevailing wage, I felt like the state that I lived in was dead, that its soul was stripped away and replaced by ignorance, greed, and hatred. So that strike showed me that there was a little bit of the old West Virginia still left. So I'm grateful for that.
Emily?
Yeah, I think Nicole really nailed it. The way, strikes transform people and they forge relationships. I mean, those will not go away. And I think it basically the educators taught the public, like they turned their classrooms out and the whole public was their classroom. And they taught us a lot about what it means to do the work of a public school teacher. And I'm the daughter of a public school teacher in Indiana. So I knew about that. I knew how challenging it was and how, little they're compensated. But I don't think a lot of people realize this. And that's what the teacher strike taught us, that I think will have a lasting effect. And they also taught us about labor struggle. I also think, for young people, for their students to return to the classroom and to tell those stories. That is just a legacy that will just perpetuate, I think, to have kids growing up knowing that these teachers fought for them, and to understand what it means to be a part of a strike and to stand for something.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all. I have a couple more questions left, but I did want to let folks who are tuning in live know that if you have questions for any of our guests, you can drop them in the comments and we will get to them at the end. Emily, one of my final questions is for you, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what's happening at the Mine Wars Museum this June.
Yes, so we are very excited to be hosting an exhibit that will be at the Mine Wars Museum and also online, and some related programming commemorating the 5th anniversary of the West Virginia educator strike, I should say, because we are almost at its 5th anniversary, which is kind of unbelievable. So we are asking for folks from across the state who were involved to, if they would share with us some of their strike ephemera, and this could be on a loan or it could be a donation to the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum. And these include things like strike signs that you might have, kicking around in your attic or garage, any T-shirts. I know people wrote songs during the strike, any recordings. We also have a hotline set up with the Google Voice number where you could leave a story, memorable story from the strike. And Nicole will also be leading some oral histories with educators around the state, and those will become part of the Mine Wars Museum archive. So you can learn more. There's a link in the chat. Is there anything I missed about that, Kenzie?
I think you got it. I mean, if folks have physical items, we'd love to see them, as well as digital items. So even if you don't have like a strike sign, or you might have tossed it in the trash, I don't know, that's okay. If you have photos or recordings, like, we would love to accept digital items as well. So you can do that all through a Google form. And if you have stories that you want to call in and share, we have a voicemail set up. So you can share your strike story either anonymously or attached to a name. We're accepting both. And we just dropped a number you can call there. We're super excited. We're going to have an opening event sometime in June. And in this forum, we ask for your advice on what weekend we should have that event. So I don't see any questions coming in from the audience, but I do have one final question for each of you. And you have to narrow it down to one. I know there's lots, but what is your favorite memory from the 2018 educator strike? Whoever has it first can jump in.
I think I have a most powerful memory, but it wasn't a happy one. I remember gripping my steering wheel because I heard over NPR that there was a deal that had been made and we were going to go back. And my husband had walked the kids into the babysitter's house because he taught too. We both taught. And I remember like the feeling, I can feel it now of my steering wheel in my hands. And I remember just like laying my forehead against it and just sobbing. And my husband came out and he's like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And I was like, "They're making us go back." I was like, there's some ridiculous deal. I don't know what it is. I'm sure it's not real. And they're making us go back. And I remember him looking at me and he was like, "I don't care if it's just me and you, we're going to stand outside on that front lawn together." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And I'm like crying. And he's like, "Absolutely." And so I swiped the tears off and we drove to the local picket line and everybody was pissed. Everybody was mad. And I just started going down the line and I was like listening and firing him up. And I was like, "You should call the president. You should tell him how you feel about this." And so we're all mad. And it's just like fuming and you can feel it getting bigger and bigger. So it went from this moment of me like gripping my steering wheel, like sobbing with it pressing into my forehead, to walking down that line on the side of a highway in Bluefield and people being like, "Over my dead body." And I'm like, teachers are so mild most of the time, especially elementary teachers. And for people to be like that, it was one of those moments where it was terrifying. Are we going to lose our job? Like, they're going to throw us in jail? What's going to happen? But yeah, like that moment, it will forever, I will feel it and smell it and like touch it forever. It'll always be there with me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Emily?
Well, so during the strike, I was working as a state folklorist, so I was technically a neutral documenter. I had my own personal beliefs and was supporting the teachers, but, I was supposed to be documenting it from a neutral perspective. And so I would go to the Capitol and record speeches. And I remember there was a rally with Cecil Roberts was speaking, and some high school students spoke, and some other rank and file members. And I had my recorder up, in the air to capture it, and was just like crying. So I like really betrayed my neutral status if anyone had seen me, because I just thought it was so moving and beautiful. But yeah, I cried a lot just observing the strike.
Thank you, Emily. Rick, do you want to close us out?
Yeah. Emily, you weren't fooling anybody, so just, right? My favorite might have been the same moment you mentioned. We have a youth mentoring program in Boone County that my coworker Liz Brunello runs. A lot of her students were super involved in the strike, doing food and things like that. And they wanted to put on a rally there at the Capitol, and there were a bunch of people there, and they spoke. It was just a real cool moment to see them caught up in a historical moment like that too. And now I think a lot of them are off in college and, on their way to other things. But it was a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you, Nicole and Emily, for being with us tonight, sharing your stories and sharing, more about the actions that y'all have been involved in, and really giving us an inside look. I want to also say thank you to our listeners for hanging with us tonight, and thank you to the West Virginia Humanities Council for their support in this programming. I want to also thank my colleague, Kirsten Uten. You cannot see her tonight, but she is behind the scenes making magic happen, as she always does. And she helped promote tonight's episode. Also want to say thank you to the museum's members and donors who allow us to continue doing this work. If you're not a member yet, now is just as good a time as any. Your membership dues provide essential and unrestricted funds to the museum that supports our day-to-day work, which includes the programming that you're listening to now. And so if it's in your heart and in your budget, we invite you to sign up to join us and choose a membership rate that feels appropriate for you, even if it does not correlate with the suggestions we provided. If you're a teacher or a strike supporter who's watching this, we hope that you'll reach out and get in touch with us about our commemorative campaign this spring and summer to mark the 5th anniversary of the educator strike. As a reminder, we would love to hear from you, the folks who are watching this right now. We've dropped a 3-minute survey in the chat so you can let us know how we did and who you want to hear from next. And we really care about what you have to say, so please take a few moments, give us feedback, help us plan future programming at the Mine Wars Museum. You can also keep up with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can sign up for a monthly e-newsletter that will hit your email inbox. I want to say thanks again for a great season. Thank you again to our guests tonight, and we hope to see y'all sometime in June. Good evening, everybody.